Good morning. Thank you all for being here. I am Maria Rivera. I am the mayor of the city of Sancho Falls, and I will be your moderator today in this important conversation, furthering equality for the next generation of women leaders. A huge thank you and special thank you to Senator Whitehouse and Congressman Cicilline. I think it's so refreshing to have our congressman and our senator have this conversation with us in an open dialogue. So with that, we're going to start with some brief introductions. If I could start with Senator Whitehouse. You're on mute, Senator.
You think I'd have learned how the Zoom thing works by now. It's wonderful to be with all of you and to join our friend David in celebrating the leadership of women in Rhode Island on Women's History Month. And I'll just mention two things that have happened recently in Washington that are, I think, notable in this context. One is that the president was able to sign a reauthorization of the Violence Against Women Act. He invited me to go to the White House to witness that, and I did, and we had a wonderful conversation. And the biggest and most enthusiastic group in the room were Native American women from around the country, for whom this reauthorization created an enormous new set of supports and access to tribal courts and all. So it was really a wonderful and quite joyous occasion. Unfortunately, the other episode that we've just been through was neither wonderful nor joyous, and that was 3 or perhaps 4 Senate Republican judiciary members who think of themselves as being candidates for president, treating our nominee for the Supreme Court, Justice Ketanji Brown Jackson, with astounding levels of disrespect. David and I are both lawyers who used to try cases, and they're the thing in court that you do when somebody's harassing a witness. You just objection asked and answered. And the judge will say, that's right, that question has been asked and it's been answered. Move on, counselor. But there was nobody to do that for Judge Jackson. And so she got just hounded over and over again with just grotesquely cynical, misleading questions and kind of false presumptions baked into the question. And it was a long ordeal. You know, she was being picked at for, I think, 13 hours the first day and 7 the second day, something like that. It was a long, long ordeal for her. And through it all, and despite all the provocation of the way she was treated, she conducted herself with extraordinary dignity and class and just completely knew the material. She was never put a foot wrong in terms of the legal questions that she was asked. And when they let her explain, she actually had quite good explanations, but they didn't want her good explanations. They just wanted to hound her. And it shows that something is a little bit off kilter in our country today, that 3 and maybe 4 men who want to be president of the United States and are using this as a forum to shop themselves, to show their wares to their base, think that that kind of behavior to a super highly qualified woman, the first African-American woman to be nominated to the Supreme Court, rings big bells with that base of theirs. So we have a lot of work to do, and I'll just leave it at that. The VAWA Day was happier. Thankfully, Cory Booker had just a resounding moment putting the hearing back to right. If you haven't seen that, it had Judge Jackson wiping away tears by the time he was done. And we all needed that after a lot of filthy, cynical, bad faith stuff by these guys.
Thank you, Senator. We definitely have a lot of work left, but we're thankful that we have you and Congressman Cicilline representing us. Congressman Cicilline.
Thank you, Mayor. Thank you all for being here and for taking time to join in this really important conversation. I want to particularly thank my colleague, Senator Whitehouse, for putting this together and inviting me to be part of it. And of course, you, Mayor, for being our wonderful moderator. And I also want to thank Vanessa and Wayona and Leilani, who are also on the panel, and look forward to hearing your thoughts as well. And while celebrating Women's History Month was really the impetus for planning this event, we know that this conversation is more important than ever. The COVID-19 pandemic really laid bare some of the long-standing inequities and the failures of our institutions. Challenges that existed were really exacerbated by this pandemic, and long overdue policy changes and investments are really needed to help women achieve full equality in our country. During the pandemic, we saw women leave the workforce at a higher rate than men. They disproportionately took on caregiving responsibilities. Women-owned businesses were hit harder than others, and domestic violence incidents increased. So I'm really grateful for the diverse group that is on this panel today. I know Mayor Rivera has some questions for us, and I look forward to that very much. But I wanted to just give you a quick update about some things that have happened in Washington. Last year, as you know, we passed the American Rescue Plan, which included key investments in childcare, and expanded and increased child tax credit, funding for state and local governments, relief for small businesses, and money for schools, among other critical investments. And this was really in direct response to the immediate challenges we were facing as a result of COVID. Now it's really important that we pass Build Back Better. This framework represents really a once-in-a-generation opportunity to transform the lives of millions of Americans by reducing the costs for workers and families of some of the largest expenses families face: prescription drugs, childcare, cutting taxes, and also addressing the climate crisis head on and creating good paying jobs as we do that. As I mentioned before, COVID-19 really laid bare, I think, the inequities that have existed for a very long time in our broken system and our broken economy. And Build Back Better really will help to address these challenges head on and make investments so that the economy works for everyone. Earlier this month, President Biden signed into law the spending bill for 2022, which included key funding for the programs like SNAP and WIC, the Community Development Block Grant Program, and the 21st Century Learning Centers Program. And finally, as Senator Whitehouse mentioned, as part of the spending package, the Violence Against Women Act was finally reauthorized through 2027. And in many cases, the authorization levels were increased, and this will help advance justice, safety, and dignity for America's women. And finally, earlier this month, President Biden signed into law the Ending Forced Arbitration of Sexual Assault and Sexual Harassment Act. This will restore access to justice for millions of survivors of sexual assault and harassment. And I was proud to work with Congresswoman Bustos on this bill in the House to end this practice of forced arbitration, which allows predators to continue acting without consequence, and that finally will now come to an end. We've passed a number of other important bills in the House that are very important to women: the Paycheck Fairness Act, Equal Pay for Equal Work, the FAIR Act, as I just mentioned, to end forced arbitration and consumer employment agreements completely, the Pregnant Workers Fairness Act, the Family Violence Prevention and Services Improvement Act, the Equality Act, and the Women's Health Protection Act to finally codify the right to abortion established by Roe versus Wade. And so there's a lot more work that remains to be done. But in this month that we're celebrating Women's History, it's also important to celebrate our successes, but recognize there's a lot of work ahead. And thank you again for including me in this panel.
Thank you, Congressman. I can't think of a better topic to have to close Women's History Month, right? Furthering equality for the next generation of women leaders. But before I go on, I want to introduce Wayona Nelson Davies, the Executive Director for the Economic Progress Institute, and Vanessa Bowles, the Executive Director for the Sojourner House, and of course, Leilani Garias Flores, who is from Blackstone Academy. Thank you for being here. I'm so happy that we're having this conversation. And as I ask you questions, please talk a little bit about yourself and what you do. So, when I started in this position, this was, to me, being the first woman and the first Latina in this position statewide was really important. And I advocate, every time I have to make decisions, I advocate for our youth and how I can help our young women also be in these positions, and for them to really think that they too can be in these positions. But if we don't give them opportunities, others are not going to give them opportunities. So with that, I want to start my first question to Leilani. Leilani, welcome. So as a woman, what are the most important issues to you and the next generation of women leaders?
Hi, my name is Leilani. Well, for me, at least, a lot of what I want to focus on is specifically like education and stuff, and basically like low income families and just like everything girls go through. So making sure that education is fair, because I know growing up, we girls weren't really picked on to to do like the heavy lifting. Like if a teacher needed help with something, they would pick the boys, or they'd usually go for stronger men to help them out with things. And I just felt like that was always unfair. So focusing on like that and making sure that we're like all equal and stuff. Also, like what you said, getting paid the same. I know that for me at least, I want to go into art when I go to college, and I want to make art, and I want to make the same amount of money as a man would make when he makes his art, you know? So having those opportunities would be great, and just like anything that can just help my family financially would be great for me at least. Because I know as a woman we struggle a little bit more. Where we can't really get to that finish line as quick as men do. They kind of just speed through it, and we get pushed back with so many different obstacles. So I guess anything that can really help us get to the end as well and get to our finishing point would be great for me.
Thank you. If there is one thing that you can ask Senator Whitehouse and Congressman Cicilline to advocate for, I know you mentioned a few things, but if there is one thing, what is that one thing that you would ask them to advocate for young women like yourself in Congress?
There's so many things.
They have a lot of power in Congress, so.
Yes. This is something I've actually seen a lot recently, specifically with like menstrual cycles and stuff that we girls go through. I wish there was a way for like schools to kind of have that accessible. I know there's times when like girls and stuff, they just don't have those products on them, and these products are expensive. So maybe having that at school as well, just for all girls and stuff. Probably just like providing those to schools and having those be here just whenever someone needs them. I think that would be like my biggest thing, because there has been so many accidents that I've seen, at least at my school, with like girls that just, you know, it goes through their pants or they have to be sent home. So possibly with that, and maybe having more leniency towards girls that have stronger pains that aren't going to be able to go to school. Because I know for like me, like my best friend, hers hits a lot more stronger. So she tries not to miss school a lot, because there's times when she's not able to make things up. So maybe having that leniency and like, yeah, you can stay home and you can make this up after. So that would be great.
Thank you. So I know that this is a conversation that's happening at the state levels, but Congressman and Senator, is this also a conversation that's happening at a national level, like in Congress?
The issue that Leilani just mentioned, Mayor?
Yes.
Yeah, no, I know there's state legislation on this, and I know that some of the mayors have actually been addressing this issue. I don't know that there's federal legislation, but as a result of Leilani's comments, I will see what we have on the House side, and I'm sure Senator Whitehouse will do the same on the Senate side. So thanks for raising it.
Get that, Leilani. See, maybe we can call it something wrapped around Leilani.
There you go.
Thank you. So my next question is going to be for Wayona. What are some of the biggest barriers women face in the workplace and economic equality, and how can we support them in post-pandemic economy?
Thank you so much. I'm really honored to be a part of this conversation. And happy Women History Month to all. As Senator Whitehouse raised, last week, I was also watching the hearings, the Supreme Court confirmation hearings. And there was a part that resonated with me as I even thought about this panel discussion. And it was when Judge Kantachi Brown Jackson gave a special introductory message to her daughters. And it resonated with me for a few reasons. As a woman, as a mother, a working mother of 2 daughters, and as a Black woman lawyer and professional. And it resonated with me in thinking about the barriers that we women have faced to get to where we are, the questions of our competency that continue to happen despite proving ourselves over and over again, and also how much we give to our loved ones and our community and our country, and sometimes forgetting ourselves. So that piece really sat with me for a while. The other part that resonated with me was her hope for her daughter's future. And I thought about my beautiful, bold, bright, Black daughters that I'm raising. And I thought about their futures and the futures of Leilani and other next generation women leaders. And part of that hope scared me, right? In thinking about what barriers will they continue to face if we do not do something about it. But then it also gave me hope that we can do something about it to make sure that when Leilani does her art or whatever is going to happen in the future, she can stand up and say, I am getting paid just as much as men in this field. So there's hope there, as much as I'm scared about what may be if we don't do something right now. So in thinking of some of the barriers, there are many that women face in the workplace and economic equity. There are a few I would like to uplift for us right now. And I would like to start with gender wage gap that continues today. Ironically, Equal Pay Day was March 15 in the middle of Women's History Month. And what Equal Pay Day is, it's a day that symbolizes how much further in a year average woman would have to work to catch up to what men made the previous year before. And this continues to be something we pay attention to, even though the Equal Pay Act was passed in 1963. So women today are still not making $1 to $1 that men make. On an average, it's about 83 cents to $1 that men make. And then if you factor in race and ethnicity, it's even a longer period within the year you have to go. So for example, Asian American and Pacific Islander women, their Equal Pay Day will be May 3rd, which is 5 months into the year, 75 cents to $1. Black women, September 21st, 9 months into the year to catch up at 58 cents to $1. Native American women, November 30th, 50 cents to $1. Latina women, December 8th, 49 cents to $1. That's a huge issue. It should not be that way. And so that's, for me, that's a big barrier because it really affects the economic security of women. It also affects how women remain in poverty compared to men. And then when we think about building wealth, that affects how we're able to build wealth, how we're able to have a safety net and plan for retirement for ourselves and our family. So that's one of the barriers I'll identify today. The second barrier is paid family leave. Women remain the primary caregivers of our families, and it's really hard and challenging to do that while trying to stay on our job. And so women, in order to take time off, we run the risk of losing jobs, being pushed out, or taking leave without pay. In the middle of the pandemic, that's even a bigger issue because you are being pulled out of work. For example, COVID-related symptoms, that's a long list. And so before, you may be able to continue working if your child had a cold. Now, if your child have a cold, your child is being sent home and you're pulled out of work and may have to stay home while that child is being quarantined or getting tested. And so it's a big issue of how many weeks we can provide to women to be able to take time away and take care of their family and other loved ones. We talk about the care economy a lot, and the care economy is really about workers who take care of the rest of us. So certified nursing assistants, teacher, childcare assistants are women who are out there who took care of the rest of us during the pandemic, who could not stop working, healthcare workers. And so really thinking about how we can provide resources for those in the care economy that remain in the lowest paying jobs, and it shouldn't be that way. So we need to think about how to boost employment, increase wages, and provide upward mobility for those who are in our care economy. And then I'll end with childcare, which again is another issue for women not being able to afford childcare. And now we're talking about putting on higher rent, paying for gas and paying for food. And so we need to think about making sure that there are childcare facilities that can remain open, making sure we have workers, and making sure families are able to provide for their children and be able to afford childcare. So those are a few of the barriers I want to uplift here. And there's a lot of policy solutions to these barriers. And we talk about some of them right now about, lessening the wage gap, making sure paid family leave, there's more weeks within that, making sure there are childcare affordability, and a lot of different ways we can support by addressing these on a policy front.
Thank you, Winona. And I know that Congressman Cicilline and Senator Whitehouse are working on all of these issues really hard. You know, I question all the time, how long is it going to take for us to be at the same level, right? We just have to keep working and working. And it's unfortunate that we have to continue advocating and working, but if we don't do it, who else is going to do it? So thank you for that. Vanessa, thank you so much for being here. Domestic violence, it's our #1 phone call here in the police department through this pandemic. It's a huge, it takes a huge toll on everybody. When I think about domestic violence, I also think about mental health, which is a conversation that a lot of people are talking about. So my question to you is, since the beginning of the pandemic, we have seen a rise in domestic violence incidents. What do you think are the most critical supports and policies we can enact for victims and their families?
Thank you so much, Mayor. Good to see you. And thank you so much, Senator Whitehouse and Representative Cicilline, for the invitation to be here to talk about some of these issues. I'm the executive director of Sojourner House, which is a victim services agency that provides shelter, housing, counseling, and other supportive services to victims of domestic violence, sexual assault, and human trafficking here in Rhode Island. And as the mayor indicated, during the pandemic, we saw just an unprecedented amount of requests for help. I do think it's important to point out that domestic violence and sexual assault have always been issues of public health epidemic proportions in Rhode Island and throughout the country, but they just reached new heights during the pandemic when we were in lockdown and victims literally had nowhere to go but to stay in physical spaces with their abuser. It created situations where more people needed immediate help. So when we think about what resources victims need, one way to think about it is in 3 separate layers. The first layer being emergency services. So making sure in those really dangerous, critical situations that victims have access to hotlines, support, emergency shelter, law enforcement advocacy. And then there's another layer for victims that maybe are not in an abusive situation right this moment, but are working to rebuild their lives, a longer term plan for affordable housing, for counseling services. And the mayor is absolutely correct that so many of the clients that we work with at Sojourner House and other victim services agencies have severe mental health issues because of the traumatic experiences they have endured as a victim. But then there's also the layer of prevention. I think I speak for everyone when I say that at Sojourner House, and certainly on a national level, I think we all envision a world where everyone can live a life free of abuse. And in order to achieve that, we really have to invest in education and prevention and work towards an understanding that as a society, we will not tolerate abuse. And it is a long-term plan to work towards that. I mean, this is not something obviously that's going to happen overnight, but it really is important that we invest in the emergency services, the longer-term solutions, and the prevention piece so that we can holistically approach these really complex issues. In terms of policies, obviously, I was thrilled. All of us in the Victim Services Agency movement, we were so happy to see the Violence Against Women Act reauthorized. It was disappointing it took so long. It should be something that just happens without so much delay, but certainly that is a step in the right direction. In terms of what we're seeing at Sojourner House, we still really need resources across the board for all services, including affordable housing. I think we're going to talk a little more in this conversation about housing, but it is one of the biggest barriers for victims to leave an abusive situation. We really have to invest in long-term solutions for safe, affordable housing for victims.
Thank you, Vanessa. Housing is one of my priorities here because I know how important it is. And I'm trying to figure out, right, how to bring more transitional housing, because what do you do when they're in these situations and you have to take them out right away? in these situations. So affordable housing, having housing available, transitional housing is extremely important. So I want to give the opportunity to Senator Whitehouse and Congressman Cicilline just to weigh in on these last three questions, because we've taken over the conversation and really haven't given you the opportunity to give us your feedback on these questions. Thank you. We can hear you, Senator. Not yet.
There we
Now, yes. Oh, you put yourself on mute. Well, we can start with Congressman Cicilline.
I think so. Oh, no.
I hear you, Congressman. Yes.
Okay, I was just seeing a Senator Whitehouse.
there. I think it,
Yeah, no, you just touch it one
Anybody
time,
else?
Senator, and don't touch it again. Don't touch it one time. No, we can't hear you.
There you go. Now you're
There
unmuted.
we go. No,
There you go. Don't do anything. No, you got muted again.
go ahead, David, and I'll just try to figure it out at my end.
okay, you're good. Don't
You're
touch it
done.
again.
Oh. No, I thank you for the comments. I mean, I think the issue of housing, which really was in everyone's comments, is a really important one. It's an important one for Rhode Island. It's an important
Just
one.
got me on mute.
Oh, there you go. Senator, sorry, go ahead.
Go ahead, David. Let me just make sure
Oh.
we're stabilized here.
Okay, so I think the issue of housing is, a really important priority. It's something that we invest in deeply in Build Back Better, because we know it's sort of central to an ability for kids to go to school and be successful, for people to have a job and be successful, and obviously for safety, particularly for survivors of domestic violence. So housing remains a really big priority in the House Democratic package that went over to the Senate and Build Back Better. I know it's a priority for our whole delegation. And making certain that agencies that are providing the services that Vanessa spoke about are well funded is critical. And we provided some support, obviously, in the American Rescue Plan. But this is going to be an ongoing responsibility, particularly since I don't think we've begun to fully appreciate all of the mental health implications that have come out of COVID. I mean, it has brought, a tremendous need to the surface, and we have to be prepared to really deal with both the short-term and long-term implications of this pandemic on mental health. So I would just thank the panelists for raising both of those issues.
Thank you.
Okay, I figured out using the space bar as a backstop around whoever is muting me. First, let me thank Vanessa and Sojourner House and congratulate them for the earmark that they received. It was very competitive for earmarks, and it really, I think, will help a lot that they rose to the top. And so congratulations there. And our whole Rhode Island domestic violence community is such a bunch of stars. They keep getting recruited to national level, whether it's Peg Langhammer, Deb DeBear, Tanya Harris. It's really been pretty remarkable. So really, really proud of you. And thank you for your support with us being able to improve VAWA. And we're going to continue to try to improve funding. We fixed the little glitch with the funding, the victims funding. So we're going to keep working to support you. For WIONA, paid family leave is probably the top crusade of Senator Gillibrand, and I'm eager to be her wingman and all of that, and I support her efforts. Patty Murray is our lead on the Paycheck Fairness Act, and I'm hoping we can get that passed. And I think David and I are both quite confident, maybe too strong a word, but very hopeful that very significant home and community care can be provided through whatever Build Back Better turns into in the weeks ahead. And as you know so well, it is primarily women who have to shoulder the responsibility of either elder family members or disabled family members or children's in the family when they need home care. So to really build robust support, like pretty much every other developed economy in the world has, is, I think, vitally important and is a key and readily achievable goal. So those are the things I'd flag.
Thank you. Thank you, Senator. So we don't have a lot of time left. We have about another 10 minutes. I'm going to ask a few more questions, but if we can limit the amount of time on the questions, just so that we have enough time for other panelists, sorry. So Leilani, back to you. How do you think we can empower the next generation of women leaders like yourself?
I think just continue doing great work. The more I see representation, the more I'm going to want to go into it. So if I see more women firefighters, police officers, people in office, I think as a little girl, at least, I would have loved to see that, because I think that would have been something I would have been like, yeah, I want to do that when I'm older. She did it, so I can do it. For example, seeing Kamala Harris like in office, like that was one of the most amazing moments, I think, in history, especially because she's also a woman of color. So it's not just like she's a woman, she's also a woman of color. So anyone can do it, you know, like if you really put your mind to it, if you're a girl, woman of color, anything, you can really do it. So I think just continue doing great things, and little girls will start to see that and they'll be like, yeah, I'm going to do that too.
Awesome. Thank you. I still get chills when I hear VP Kamala Harris, because that's huge for us, right? I mean, this is the first time we see this. And me being a first, the executive directors that are on here, not sure if they're first, but it has taken a lot for us to be in the positions that we are in right now. So it's important, I'm sure it's important for all of us on this panel to make sure that we continue opening doors for young girls like yourself to also understand that you too can be in these positions. So we're here to support you. You have to use us as your resource. That's one piece of advice that I got when I was young. Make sure you use your resource. We're all a resource to you.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you. Vanessa, back to you in housing. Yeah, I know how important it is, right, to have more housing available for the victims. But what do you do in situations like, let's talk about Central Falls. There's not a lot of space here. Like, what is the solution for a city like Central Falls that is so dense, was the hardest hit community with the pandemic, the domestic violence rate, the phone calls are, you know, the highest calls we're getting right now. What is the solution? What can we do to try to address this issue of housing?
Right. Mayor, you're absolutely correct. It's a huge challenge right now because there's an inventory issue, not just in Rhode Island, but throughout the country. And so we really have to address that, and we really have to invest in construction of rehab and new construction for affordable housing. And affordable housing is certainly a big piece of the pie, but it's also important to keep in mind the supportive wraparound services that individuals, especially families who have been impacted by domestic violence, really are going to need to thrive in affordable housing. So providing those counseling services. We know, for example, that housing insecurity, we know that victims of domestic violence who are experiencing housing insecurity are more likely to also experience depression, PTSD, and substance abuse issues. So providing support to clients when they are able to access affordable housing is really important. And we also have to think about the economic piece. So there's the housing piece, but then we have to make sure that families can afford to sustain that rent and sustain the care for their family. So it's really important that we are providing access to benefits and that we are raising benefits so that they keep up with inflation and so that families really can support their children, because otherwise we're just repeating these cycles of generational poverty and domestic violence that we continue to see.
Yeah, and let's not even, don't even let me start about how do we expect our students to succeed in school when we don't have safe, affordable housing for them. So thank you for that. And I love the work that you're doing. It's work that's needed and it's amazing. Wayona, back to you. Let's talk about COVID-19 a little bit. It's clear that women have been more drastically impacted by COVID-19 and minority women even more so. What do you think we can take away from this to prioritize marginalized communities?
Thank you, Mayor. And I'm really honored about 9 weeks into the job as the new Executive Director of the Economic Progress Institute at a time where we're really thinking about what policies we need to advocate for going forward. And one of the things that's centered to the work we're doing now is one, leading with equity. So in thinking about how to prioritize our relief efforts with marginalized community, it's important that we start by understanding those who are impacted by COVID-19, but also revisiting our history of when we had opportunities, for example, with the New Deal that excluded domestic worker and agricultural worker from Social Security, and the housing programs that excluded Black women, Black families from getting subsidized housing. And so when we subsidize housing assistance. So when we think about recovery for COVID-19, we need to start with understanding where the disparities are and making sure that whatever recovery efforts we have, whether it's with the American Rescue Plan, we think about start from the beginning and find out which communities have been impacted, which communities have been excluded, historically excluded, and start with what we need to do to make sure those communities are lifted up when we talk about recovery efforts. So that's one piece. I think the other piece where we need to prioritize marginalized communities is healthcare, right? We've just got out of a pandemic. So looking at our healthcare system, who have access to healthcare coverage, including immigrants. Right now, one of the things we're working on together with a lot of community partners is maternal health and making sure women can get coverage 12 months postpartum, regardless of the immigration status. And that's important, a marginalized group that we need to think about. We need to listen to women and make sure they're treated, especially women of color. I, as a Black woman, and an attorney at that, had an opportunity to speak up when I almost lost my child because I wasn't listened to when I was pregnant. So we have to listen to women of color throughout when we think about how to revamp our healthcare system. And everyone have talked about housing, and housing is so connected to almost everything. So again, with ARPA, a Build Back Better, and other recovery efforts, we need to think about how to increase affordable housing, how to increase assistance for a down payment. So we think about building that generational wealth, and home ownership is part of that. So we really need to be mindful and make sure we're naming equity, we're naming groups that have been historically marginalized, and we're naming what recovery would be for those specific communities.
Thank you so much for that. When I think of postpartum, I think it's a conversation that's not happening a lot. And it's so important that we address it because nobody knows when you're home with your child what you're going through. Like the stories that I hear, we need to have those resources for the women in postpartum. So thank you for that. Congressman and Senator, what can we do as women to support that you are doing, to support the work that you are doing in DC? What can we do?
Well, my favorite comment was from Barbara Mikulski, who was the Dean of the Women in the Senate, and who I was very, very fond of before. And she is retired now, unfortunately, but she was a real powerhouse. And her favorite saying was, never agonize, organize. So getting involved with groups that support the issues you care about is probably the best way to expand your own voice and follow Barbara Mikulski's advice. On a specific topic, I just add that Rhode Island Housing has a lot of money for the program Rent Relief Rhode Island. And if you're having trouble, anybody who's watching this with either rent or utility bills, if you have not been in touch with Rhode Island Housing, please do. There is money there, and the program is up and running, and they're reaching out to try to make sure everybody in Rhode Island who qualifies gets access to those funds.
Thank you, Senator. So we have somebody from Rhode Island Housing who sits at City Hall every week, 3 times a week, to help the residents of Central Falls. Actually, I think we help residents that come from Central Falls, but anybody who needs that resource, we have someone here who's focused just on that. So I want to thank Rhode Island Housing for that opportunity of being able to host someone here at City Hall. Congressman?
Well, thank you. I mean, you are, the members of this panel are doing it every day in the advocacy that you do and the representation you provide in the city of Central Falls, Mayor. But I just build on what Senator Whitehouse said. The provisions in the American Rescue Plan provide enormous relief to working families in our state. to small businesses to make sure cities and towns could get through this pandemic, making sure that people know what's available to them. So you can contact my office, Senator Whitehouse's office, if you have any questions about some help you need. I think the other thing is, what we're still fighting for in Build Back Better are wildly popular. Lots of folks don't know what's in the legislation. So continuing to be vocal about how important the provisions of Build Back Better are and what a difference they'll make. And the last thing is, I think individual stories are always really important. We talk about programs and money, but having people share like what it's meant in their family's life to be provided with this assistance or to help them get through a difficult time. And so, we're always trying to collect those stories and people willing to share them either in letters to the editor or, when talk radio is talking about how bad things are. Some people saying, getting on there and talking about how it has impacted your family or your community is really helpful, because these are very popular provisions, but we're still having a tough time getting them to the president's desk. And I think the more we can build public support for them, the better.
Thank you, Congressman. So with that, I want to thank everybody who was here today. I want to thank the panelists who were here. I think this is a great conversation and we should have it more often. I want to thank Senator Whitehouse for this opportunity and Congressman Cicilline for initiating this conversation. And thank you for everything that you do in DC to support all of us women here in the state of Rhode Island. I'm going to leave it now with Senator Whitehouse and Congressman Cicilline for the closing remarks.
I just want to thank you, Mayor Rivera. You've been a wonderful moderator. I appreciate it so much. Thank you, Wayona. Everything you and the Economic Policy Institute does is so important for us in Rhode Island. Vanessa, thank you, and Sojourner House. You're a part of a really wonderful network of support for people who undergo violence. And Leilanis comes out of Sophia Academy. So she's like representing Sophia so well. And one of the greatest things happening in Rhode Island is Sophia Academy. So very well done, everybody. I'm honored to be a part of the conversation.
Thank you, Mayor, and thank you, Senator Whitehouse, for organizing this, and Vanessa and Leilani and Wayona. Thank you for the contributions you made, and thank you, Mayor. Leilani, I was thinking about what you were saying about women examples, and there are obviously, 3 other women on the screen who are incredible examples to you, I know. But one of my best friends wrote her honors thesis at Brown about women being depicted in children's literature, and they're always the nurse and the teacher, and not firefighters and police officers. And that's finally begun to change, but that's what she was talking about, what those images kids see. So the example of Judge Jackson and Vice President Harris, those are important representations of the power of women in this country, and the fact that you can be anything you intend to be, so long as you work hard enough at it and you get the right support and you have a fair shot. So that's what I think we're all working toward. Thanks again.
Thank you. Well, thank you, everyone. I hope everybody enjoys the rest of the week, and thank you for having this conversation with us today. Have a good one. Bye-bye.